My brother caught me off guard and sided with our parents. We have the typical dysfunctional family roles. My parents alternate between being the narcissist and the orbiting spouse. I, older daughter, I am the scapegoat/problem child, and my brother, younger son, is the golden child. There's a 5-year age difference between us, so we're not super close, but I feel protective of him. We had very different childhoods, obviously. Jokes were made at my expense, and if I brought up how it made me feel, I was labeled as too sensitive. I caught the brunt of my parents' emotional dysregulation. My parents have abandoned me emotionally and physically too many times to count. I left my house when I was 18, at my dad's request. My mom told me it was a bad idea to go, but I didn't want to stay in a house where I wasn't welcome, and got married to an abuser. Weird. After 2 years of that, I escaped my marriage, swallowed my pride, and with nowhere else to go, asked to come back home. Things were okay for a while. They were just glad I was alive at that point. But that eventually wore off and their narcissism came back in full force. A couple years went by, I started going to college and I met a guy. Long story short, we got married and have kids and everything is awesome. Except for my parents still. Now I have kids and I felt guilty for even the thought of keeping my parents away from their granddaughters. But it had gotten to the point where my husband can't stand the way my parents treat me, but I didn't want to rock the boat. I had tried explaining to them in the past how my childhood affected me, and it did not go well. I had always thought about asking my brother if he thought our childhood was fucked up, but was too afraid he wouldn't agree and just report back to mom and dad what I had said. I have been in therapy for years working on undoing the damage they have done, learning how to rewire my brain, and set boundaries to protect myself and my family. In 2020, my brother started therapy for the first time. After a few sessions, he texted me, "Hey, did therapy help or hurt your relationship with mom and dad?" And I was like, oh shit, this is it? We FaceTimed and realized that our childhood was not great. It was such a relief to find out that I'm not just too sensitive or blowing the whole thing out of proportion. My brother and I started taking more, we were bonding. He admitted that he knew he was the golden child, but didn't necessarily want to be. He acknowledged the difference in the way we were treated. We'd send each other TikToks about childhood trauma, memes about narcissistic parents, humor is coping, right? Grinning face with sweat, and talk about similar experiences we had growing up. The past few months, despite there being hundreds of miles and boundaries between us, my parents are still deeply affecting me. They bring up my rocky past, my mistakes I have made, my abusive first marriage and subsequent drug addiction. They still mask their compliments with criticism. All things I want to heal from, but struggle to because they just won't leave it alone. Then they started to use the same tactics and speak to my daughters the way they talk to me. That's not okay. My oldest daughter has anxiety, NVLD, and suspected ADHD. She's very active in extracurricular activities and sports. During our last in-person interaction with my mom, she joked with my daughter that CPS was going to take her away from us because she has so many bruises on her legs. My daughter had an absolute breakdown, rightfully so. I decided then that I was going to shut this shit down. I went NC kind of out of the blue, and haven't spoken to them in 3 weeks. The things that happened between us need to be addressed before I can move forward. My therapist and I talked about it, and decided that writing a letter to my parents was the best course of action. I gave my brothers a heads up just in case. I did not mention him in the letter, and began writing. A couple days after I told him about my plan, he texts me wanting to talk about our parents. I call him, and he is distraught. He has spoken to our parents and he doesn't want me to send the letter. He wants me to tell them over FaceTime. I would be doing them a disservice by writing them a letter. I owe it to them to talk to them. He starts crying. Our parents deserve to have a relationship with my kids. They're just old boomers stuck in their ways. I told him I'd think about it. But I feel kind of betrayed? Like, damn, maybe I am the only one who feels this way. I had felt validated before, but now I find myself questioning if I should drop this whole thing and let it go back to the way things were. I guess I just feel lost all over again. I know I'm not the only one that has had this experience, it just sucks. Thank you for listening. My older brother Carter went to the same university as Annika. Recently, he announced that he had gotten engaged to his girlfriend. Our family was happy for him, but we were surprised at the same time since we didn't know he was dating anyone. He said he'd introduce her at an upcoming family party. The party rolled around and guess who walked in the door with Carter? Annika. I honestly thought I was hallucinating, and I felt sick seeing her again. Carter left Annika with some relatives, then came over to me and asked to talk. We went to another room and Carter explained he'd met Annika at a party and didn't recognize her, but it was love at first sight. But after he found out her full name, he realized it was the same Annika who spread lies about me. He confronted her and she claimed to not remember me or anything she did. He let it go because he really liked her. He then pleaded with me to be nice to her since she didn't remember what she had done and that she was a good person. I just told him I needed a moment to myself to process everything. When I eventually went back to the party, I decided I would ignore her. I didn't say anything rude, I just didn't talk to her or acknowledge her. She didn't talk to me or acknowledge me either. But when we sat down to eat, all hell broke loose. One of my aunts asked me how I felt about my brother getting married. I tried changing the subject, but she kept pressing, so I eventually snapped and said something like, I actually don't feel great about it considering his future wife bullied me and never apologized. Everyone turned to look at Annika. She just started crying and ran out of the room. Carter went after her, and they left early. The rest of the night was chaotic because everyone was asking me what happened. I told them. Went over to my other grandparents' house. There we watched the movie Babe. My dad did not deny it. He blamed it on the cold medicine he was on and said he thought I was my mom. The next day I went to my Aunt Monica's house and she told me her father, also my dad's father, had done the same thing to her and her sisters, so it was okay and normal and that I better get used to it. That made throw up on my cousin's bed, which I got yelled at for. I really don't remember what else happened that holiday weekend. I went to a psych ward later that month though, called the Charter Center. When I went back to school, there was this multi-page report that accompanied me. In that report my mom had taken a black permanent marker and blacked out a bunch of stuff. A lady asked what was blacked out. My mom told the lady, just a bunch of lies Mango Rainbow told. It totally threw me off guard. I never spoke of that Thanksgiving night again. I began resenting my mother at that moment and the relationship with my father was forever tarnished. I realized that all the back scratches and cuddling were abnormal. He made it very clear to not tell my mom because she would be jealous. I don't remember him ever touching me sexually other than that breast fondling though. I still don't know if those cuddles and back scratches were normal dad/daughter behaviors or of a sexual predator nature. I guess I'll never know. I left home when I was 15 because my father and I just couldn't get along. It is important to note at 36 years old I have forgiven my father. I have no resentment for him. I am 100% over what he did. When I was 28 my parents were going through a divorce and my mother began using the fact that my father had molesting me against him. All of a sudden they weren't lies and she believed me. I am 36 now and still can't get over it. I hate her. Like I truly hate her. I cannot forgive her for not protecting me. For not believing me. For not taking care of me. For choosing money and her husband over me. There is so much more to my mommy monster, but this is the biggest thing I just can't get past. How do I move on? I have cut her out of my life. I do not speak to her unless forced. She is in my head though. She is in my heart. She is in my soul. I look in the mirror and she is in the mirror. I look at my son and she is in my son. She is my family. She will forever be at family events and in my son's life.